Devastators in a Black Templar army? On today's video, we'll tell you how this firstborn unit is making the cut for heavy support.
Welcome to Implausible Nature, home to competitive Black Templars gameplay.
Alright, so on today's video, we are going to be wrapping up our codex review of all of the units and what units are going to be best in each slot for Black Templars. So rounding it out with heavy support, we're going to start it off with the newest and one of the most popular units that you can take for heavy support, and that is the Eradicator squad. These guys debuted in Dominus and are pretty much the same. We'll kind of go over their abilities here real quickly. They have a melter rifle, which is essentially a 24-inch range melt-a-gun, which is nice. That extra range helps a lot, but the real key to why this unit is so good is their special rule total obliteration, which if they did not advance and they select only one target as the target of their shots for the whole unit, you can fire a second time. So essentially giving them 6 shots instead of 3 for a minimum sized unit. This is huge. This is the main reason why these guys are so good. That and their points. They did receive a 5-point increase in the latest FAQ, but even still, they are 100% worth taking at 45 points per model. I'd recommend, 2 squads of these probably, or if you're short on slots, you could take a single 6-man squad and combat squad it, which would help a lot. They are pretty tough as well. They're Gravis, so you're going to get that extra durability of tough 5 and 3 wounds. Their biggest downside, though, is they are slow. Only 5 inches of movement. You're not going to really want to advance them unless you absolutely have to, like you have no shots or you just need to get on an objective maybe late in the game or something like that, because you do lose the ability to use total obliteration. So that is something that you definitely have to consider. Strategic reserves is definitely a decent option for these guys to make sure they get where you need them to be. Because with only 24-inch range and a 5-inch move, you can be outranged by your opponent if you're not careful. So something to consider. We already talked about the differences and benefits of taking multi-melta attack bikes versus eradicators. You can see that video here in our fast attack video. But overall, these guys are just a really great, cheap, effective tank hunting unit or monster hunting unit that is worth considering in every list.
Yeah, absolutely. The Eradicators are amazing for the point. Even with that 5-point increase, these things were pretty much in every list that you could see. Much like the attack bikes that we talked about in a previous video, they're excellent sources of that melta, which is essential for getting rid of those pesky monsters, elite infantry, and vehicles. The benefit of them overtaking the attack bite is that they are infantry, so they can move through runes, so that's a key, and they work well with our current lists of aura stacking with Eradicators, so getting those rerolls as well as the apothecary and then bringing them back, that's definitely worthwhile for us. All right, boys and girls, grab Devastators. You better buy them now. Until Games Workshop comes around and says Grav is no longer 10 points a pop, these guys are going to dominate boards. I just bought 2 units of them. Been using them to very good effect in the last few months to take care of problems that we cannot deal with in close combat. Death Guard, Blood Angels. Now we're going to be dealing with a lot of Dark Angels and other armies coming up here pretty quick. Grav at 30-inch range, sitting in your deployment zone on your objectives, will decimate those units. You no longer have to fear those units coming to you, getting to your opponent or your squishy units, unless you want them to, because they will delete units. Yes, they got nerfed. Yes, they don't no longer have that stratagem, but a unit of these guys kill upwards to 10 to 12 Marines in a volley with the Shrub based on your rolling. So average is a little bit less than 10. But these guys are going to be killing things from 30 inches away. you don't really have to worry. You'll get multiple turns with them. Depending on how you deploy your board, or you play in your board, you get them in cover. They'll get that a little bit durable cover save there. They can screen out your deployment zone so you don't have to worry about deep strike. If your opponent does deep strike, you get that off spec scan, delete something. So they got a lot of different things that they can do. They're very, very cheap. We got 135 points. You can throw an extra weapon on your sergeant if you want to. These guys are going to be in a lot of lists, or should be in a lot of lists, in my opinion. So go get some while you can.
Yeah, I just bought 2 units myself as well. These guys are a fantastic unit. I know what everyone is thinking, Devastators in a Black Templars army, but the way I look at it is they're just a Crusader squad that happened to bring all the heavy guns. I also really feel like Grav fits our aesthetic a good bit because Black Templars, I feel like, are an army that enjoys high rate of fire weapons. So, look at like the Land Raider Crusader with all of its high rate of fire weapons. It's very, very Black Templar. So I think that they are thematic, even though they are, a Devastator squad. And once upon a time, we could not take them. But that aside, mechanically, they are one of the best units in this slot that we can take. They will compete directly with Eradicators for slots, not necessarily role, but for slots, especially when you only have 3 slots and you probably want to run 2 squads of each of these guys in a list sometimes. So they no longer need to have the drop pod in order to be effective with that extra 6-inch range that they have now. I do also want to mention the Multimelter Devastators. They are probably going to be best in a pod. I think they are still a viable unit, especially with the buff to Multimeltas. You're now going to be throwing out 2 shots per model instead of just one. A drop pod will get them where they need to be safely. You could also consider strategic reserves, but I think if you're going to take a Devastator squad, most of the time you're probably going to pick Grav Devastators. Simply because they are a very good utility unit, taking out all types of Marines and heavy infantry and light vehicles in a pinch.
Next up, we have another a little bit obscure unit here. It's going to be the Whirlwind. It's been showing up on some Space Marine competitive lists lately and some top finishes, and for good reason. So the Whirlwind is not a unit that we would normally take. So I can hear the shouting in the background from our fans, but it is useful. So again, just like the suppressors and devastators and eliminators, they have a use. So this is something that you can hide in the back of your deployment zone on an objective or wherever you want to. Maybe you can just hide it behind some blocking line of sight ruins or something to that effect, because they ignore line of sight. They're blast weapons, and they can just sit there and just pound your opponent. Maybe your opponent has something hiding in their side of the board just for engage on all fronts, or maybe they're doing an action. Have you worried about that liquor from Tyranids that just plops itself right in a ruin? You can't see it. This guy will take care. So it has its uses. It is a shooty unit that will do some decent incidental damage to larger units, but it can take out those annoying units that are hiding on your opponent's list. It also does have access to a stratagem called Suppression Fire, which is a great way to turn off Overwatch or set to defend if you don't have suppressors. So, and even better than the suppressors, you don't need line of sight for it. So it's great if you have those extra CP and you take a Whirlwind. An awesome place to use it.
Yeah, I think this is a unit that has a lot of utility, like you mentioned. I kind of feel like this is the heavy support version of suppressors. Fairly inexpensive, can do a bunch of different things for you. Hold an objective, stay completely out of line of sight, which is an advantage for it, and just support your army in a way that a lot of units can't. So definitely worth considering. As you mentioned, I'm sure people are like, Whirlwind, Devastators, what is wrong with you guys? But I will point out that the Whirlwind in our 4th edition codex, it was not an option for us to take. But that being said, at the back of that codex, there was a list of a crusade with all the elements of that crusade, and there was a Whirlwind listed. So even back then, we could take Whirlwinds. So even though it's not the most temporary thing ever to take, still consider it in your competitive games. All right, so that brings us to the end of our list of units for the competitive choices that we're going to make. We did want to touch on one last unit because I know if we didn't, we were going to get questions. And of course, that is the mighty Land Raider Crusader. So to be clear up front, we do not feel like it is a competitive unit right now. It's just too expensive. It's 285 points. It's a big point sink for what it does, and it losing core really hurt it, even more so than the other tanks because of all the buffs that we were able to give it before it they went to that core mechanic there. Things like divine protection, the Aurelian shroud. We can no longer make it as durable as it once was in 8th edition. So it's not a unit that we're going to be taking often, except maybe in a casual game. It certainly has some nice things about it. Of course, it's virtually the same as it's always been. It can transport 16 models. It has a ton of anti-infantry fire. It has assault launchers, which is a really great keyword to have now. It also, of course, has smoke screen, which will help its durability a bit, but not enough to make it competitive. And then, of course, it has our special stratagem, shock and awe. So honestly, if I were going to take a Land Raider, there's really not a ton of things, and this is the other problem it suffers from. There's really not a ton of things that I'm going to want to put in it. Terminators used to be the go-to, but we are so much faster on foot than we used to be, and it's a huge point sink on an already expensive unit. If you're doing that, I think the only unit that I would probably put in it right now are Centurions, which is another unit which suffered heavy nerfs and is just unfortunately no longer competitively viable. I would put Centurions in it simply because they will, without an invul save, it's basically some extra protection for them. And they're also pretty slow, So that's kind of my thoughts on it. Hopefully, in the future, the Land Raider will get better again to where we want to run it regularly. But for now, it's going to stay at home.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. Raider Crusader, amazing looking unit. It's been fluffy for us for as long as I can remember. Unfortunately, 8th edition, 9th edition, they just got nerfed into oblivion with the points cost. If it was more economical, somewhere closer to about 200 points, I would say, okay, maybe this is something that we can use. Right now, with the lost core keyword, without being able to protect it properly, yeah, it's keep it on your shelf. Unfortunately, as much as it hurts me to say it, because I have 3 of them, they're not going to be in competitive lists. I know you've seen a lot of YouTube videos out there with them in it. I just cannot recommend them. And Alex obviously is on the same wavelength.
Yeah.
Great fluffy unit for us. It's what a lot of people see in their mind's eye when they think Black Templars, but in a competitive list, they're not where you want to be.
So that about wraps it up for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you want to see more content like this, hit that subscribe button and make sure you click the bell icon to get notified on all of our latest content. We have a Patreon and we greatly appreciate their support. So if you'd like to get some exclusive content or you'd just like to support the channel, we really appreciate it. Also, be sure to check out our Discord. We have an active community of players on there where you can get lots of help or discussion on all things Black Templars. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.